You check your phone. Nothing. 2 minutes later, you check again. Still nothing. Here's the part that's hard to admit. You don't miss the person. You miss the answer your brain never got. Silence doesn't make them more interesting. It doesn't make them more special. It just makes your brain work harder. In the next few minutes, we're going to look at what actually happens inside your mind when someone goes quiet. Not the story you tell yourself about why they're busy. Not the excuses. The pattern underneath it. Why an unanswered message can pull at you more than 100 answered ones ever did. This isn't about them. It's about a loop your brain may be running without asking permission. Logically, this should be simple. Someone stops replying. You move on. But that's not what happens. Instead, your mind starts running a search, replaying the last conversation, reading the last message again, wondering if you said something wrong. One silence. And suddenly, 100 explanations. Here's a simplified way to picture it. Certainty tells your brain, nothing left to do here. Uncertainty tells your brain, stay alert. This isn't finished. When someone replies constantly, your mind can rest around them. When someone goes quiet, your mind may treat that person like an open question it hasn't answered yet. Not more lovable. Just unresolved. And there's something that makes this worse. Your phone. Last seen 5 minutes ago. 3 dots appear, then disappear. Delivered, not read. None of these things are real answers. They're fragments. But your brain treats each one like a clue in a case it's trying to solve. You open the app again, just to check. Nothing changed since the last time. You already knew that. You checked anyway. That's not about the person on the other end. That's your brain trying to close the distance between I don't know and I know, using whatever small signal it can find. A timestamp, a typing bubble, a read receipt that never changes. You never used to think this way about a screen. But now, a tiny check mark can change your whole mood. That's not weakness. That's your brain grabbing onto anything that might reduce the uncertainty, even a signal that means almost nothing. There's a second layer most people never notice. A person who responds the same way every time gives your brain something calm, predictable, almost boring in a good way. A person who responds sometimes and disappears other times gives your brain something else entirely, a puzzle. And puzzles are dangerous because they make you participate. A clear answer lets you react. A vague signal makes you investigate. So instead of accepting the silence, your mind starts working for the silence. It builds theories. It edits memories. It turns tiny details into evidence. And the more effort your brain spends trying to understand someone, the more important that person starts to feel. One simplified way to understand this: unpredictable attention can feel more gripping than steady attention. Not because it's more meaningful, but because the mind keeps checking back to see if this time will be different. A steady person gives your brain peace. An unpredictable person gives your brain a puzzle. And sometimes the brain mistakes the puzzle for passion. And this is the part most people miss. You're not obsessing over them. You're obsessing over the gap they left behind. Here's where it goes a layer deeper. At some point, you stop reacting to the actual person. You start reacting to what their silence seems to represent. Maybe it feels like rejection. Maybe it feels like losing control. Maybe it feels like proof that you weren't important enough to answer. The person becomes smaller. the meaning becomes enormous. That's why losing someone who barely gave you anything can still feel devastating. You're not just losing them. You're losing what their attention had come to represent about your own value. And this changes how you treat people, without you noticing. The person who ignores you gets excused. They're busy. That's just how they are. It's not personal. The person who is steady, who answers, who shows up every time, gets held to a higher standard. You notice their small mistakes. You expect more from them because they never once made you wait. It's a strange trade. Distance earns patience. Presence earns scrutiny. Not because the quiet one deserves more grace. Because your brain already spent so much effort explaining their silence, it doesn't want that effort to have been for nothing. This is where it helps to separate two feelings that can look identical from the inside. One is real connection. It feels steady. It doesn't spike every time someone goes quiet. The other is unfinished tension. It feels intense, but the intensity is coming from not knowing, not from actually being close to someone. Intensity is not always connection. Sometimes intensity is just uncertainty. Wearing perfume. This shows up in small, ordinary ways. You'll think about the person who canceled plans more than the one who never let you down. You'll feel more pulled towards someone who takes hours to answer than someone who answers right away. None of this means something is wrong with you. It can simply mean your brain learned to treat unpredictable attention as something worth monitoring, not something worth trusting. And once you see the pattern, something shifts. Because if this was never about how much you liked them, it was about your brain trying to close a loop it refused to let go of. And here's where this becomes impossible to ignore. Sometimes the message finally arrives. They reply, they explain, they say what you were waiting to hear. And for a moment, it feels like relief. But then something strange happens. The relief doesn't last. Minutes later, maybe hours, a new doubt appears. A new gap opens. A new silence begins. And the checking starts again. That's when you realize the answer was never the point. The loop doesn't close because someone finally responds. The loop closes when your brain stops needing the response to feel settled. So what actually helps here? Not chasing more certainty from them. Something smaller. Something quieter. The first is naming the pattern the moment it starts. Not, I miss them, but my brain is looking for closure it hasn't gotten yet. Naming it doesn't make the feeling disappear, but it stops the feeling from disguising itself as love. The second is separating the person from the uncertainty they left behind. They are not the mystery. The mystery is just a mystery, a gap in information, nothing more. And maybe the hardest one. Not treating their silence as proof of your value. Absence doesn't measure worth. It only measures absence. None of this closes the loop for you, but it can stop you from handing your piece to a gap someone else left open. This is also why walking away from someone who ignores you can feel harder than it should. Not weakness. Your brain may be reading their silence as an unfinished task, not a closed door. And unfinished tasks are exactly the kind of thing the mind doesn't want to abandon. So maybe the real question isn't, why can't I stop thinking about someone who barely responds to me? Maybe it's this. What is my brain still trying to resolve? Because closure is not always the message they finally send. Sometimes, Closure is the moment you stop asking your brain to wait for it.